I have a shameless plug. I really appreciate you guys listening in some ways to my conversations about identity, but did you know that chatting isn't the only thing I do? I love to paint. And now you can have a bit of my art in your house. It also makes great gifts, by the way. So check it out at aubreyjeanart.etsy.com. That's aubreyjeanart.etsy.com. And also hit me up on Instagram at my handle, aubreyjeanart. I'd love to hear from you. Welcome to 132nd Cherokee, the podcast explaining why we feel connected to cultures in our ancestry, even if we only have 1/32 of them in our bloodline. I'm your host, Aubrey Jean.
Hey friends, parte dos of sister duo Alyssa and Jeannie discussing their experiences being white and Asian. You know, I had a couple of light bulb moments. I live in a place where a lot of people look like me, and I don't even have to think about some things because I'm part of the majority. It was an enlightening conversation. Also, they said something that really resonated about being more than just a sum of pieces of our heritage. Hope you enjoy.
It's definitely like harder in high school just because I feel and look different than my friends, because all of my friends are tall, blonde, blue-eyed, green-eyed, and then I'm 5 feet tall.
The Norwegian Nampites.
Yeah.
The Nampites, that's great.
Yeah, but I'm only 5 feet tall, and I have brown hair, brown eyes, and so a lot of like things, I'll meet other Asian mixed kids and they'll be like, oh, you look so much more Asian than they do, but I'm like, oh really, I think they look more Asian or something. And it's almost, I feel different but also unique in that way, because there's not going to be someone that looks exactly like me, but they're also going to mix them up and think, oh, is that like, are you guys related? And that happens a lot.
Does it?
Like that happens so often. So we have some close family friends who are Filipino.
Okay.
And like it literally happens so often. Like, and it's funny because so even like the bishop's wife, and I love her to death. She is like one of the most amazing people I've ever met. But she would still mix up my brother and our Filipino friend, who's like I said, no blood relation at all. Like, but it got to the point where we literally 2 weeks ago, I was where he worked, and he just, when we came in, he was like, oh yeah, that's my sister, like, or that's my cousin. Like, it's just easier. Because people like assume automatically.
Yeah.
And not everyone, but so often that like, well, that's just how we introduce.
You're hanging out. It's a predominantly white community. Would we say it's a predominantly white community? Maybe there's just a lot of Hispanic.
There's Hispanic,
and
Hispanic
white,
population's growing.
Definitely the two biggest. That's for sure.
So we'll say the two majority populations aren't your necessarily population. Maybe what people look at you and say, like they'll automatically categorize you somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah.
Would you say that? And then
yeah.
Okay, so then you walk in and you're like friends. So you must be related because there can't be that many different families in Yamba.
Yeah.
And especially someone like for example, our friends that I'm referring to, like they lived with us for some time. Like we were like that close too. So I think they can also not like combine just what they can sense as the closeness in us as well as the way we look. Yeah, because it doesn't always happen with strangers. But I had some other kids at school that were my friends that we would call each other cousin, and a lot of what she said just like jogged my mind for a lot of topics. But it's really interesting, and what you said too, how there's a big Hispanic population here. So it's interesting because mostly growing up, people, especially when I was little and people weren't as PC, they would either assume like, they'd be like, are you Mexican? Or they'd be like, are you? And just start speaking Spanish. Cause that's, I think, what people are used to seeing. Or they'd be like, are you Chinese? And it was like Chinese. Cause I just felt like, especially as kids, they're not super, I'm talking like elementary school, right? They're not super educated on like the cultures of the world. Yeah, they're still building that knowledge. So it just like automatically goes to Chinese all the time, like to the point where I almost give up fighting it because I'm like, no, it's different. It's a completely different culture, and that was a challenging thing for people to grasp as
I want to tell you like one joke. That sounds bad. Just like on King of the Hill. Have you guys seen King of the Hill? The cartoon. It's this cartoon from like the 90s.
Oh, I guess I know which cartoon you're talking about, but I didn't watch it.
Yeah,
like,
okay. So I'm going to tell you like this one clip, the only clip I remember in King of the Hill, but then we can talk about how this is actually maybe emotionally scarring. Because I'm a little bit like miffed for you, but okay. So King of the Hill, it's like all these guys in Texas like standing around out back, and their neighborhood guys drinking beer. They're old, they're in their 40s or whatever. And it's
I'm assuming they're like Caucasian in the cartoon as well.
Yeah, they're Caucasian in the cartoon, and then they have a neighbor who's Asian. So the neighbor comes over, and he was like, "You look Asian. Where are you from?" And he's like, "I'm from Laos." And he goes, "So are you Chinese or Japanese?"
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I love too that you bring up the media representation though, because that's been something I have been paying attention to a lot my whole life, but more consciously, like more deeply in the last couple years.
Yeah. What have you seen? Like what is it you're looking for in the media representation?
So I think just to start back from my experience, I would say like I haven't been like diagnosed by a doctor, but I mean from what I can tell, like I'm sure I grew up with some body dysmorphia. Because I grew up not only in a time where people who look like me, they were either completely not represented, or there was this like stereotypical beautiful full Asian, kind of thin, no curves, like very slender face shape, like there was that. Which often is completely overly sexualized as well, and women are already overly sexualized. Thankfully, there's movements now that are combating that, but I feel like we were like so immersed in a time where women were overly sexualized, especially in media,
and especially Asian women.
Yes. And then you have when the other representation, like when I was growing up, like the Asian girl or boy is never the romantic lead or the main character. It's the nerdy friend who everyone, the smart friend, the friend with glasses, like the not pretty, like, or the nerdy guy who's so smart, or I really feel for the men too, or they're the guys like the opposite of sexualized. Like they're just the comedic, funny, like
they're the
not
comedy relief character.
Like in a way that's usually like pretty like deprecating, I think, to the cultures. Like I think because that was like funny at the time. Like and I get it. I also just want to say like I completely understand having like it's so important to have humor about things too. Like I get that. Like things are totally funny. But I think the thing is like things can be funny like that, but there needs to be a more full representation. Like if we have a more rounded like whole representation of our cultures, and the funny things are more okay because it's not only these stereotypical funny things.
I guess I haven't I can't think of an example right now of a comedy, say where you're looking at this stereotype, but let's pretend there is a comedy out there with a stereotype, and it would be okay maybe for that stereotype to be there in that comedy if there were several other comedies with different different aspects represented. So then you have full spectrum. But if you have one that's just like pinging over and over and over and over and over, then what that means is that we as media consumers are watching these things, and that's the only thing that we see. Therefore, that's the only thing we think is true. There's so many things that I grew up not realizing wasn't a thing. Like I didn't realize that in the 40s and 50s there was a huge censorship in movies and stuff. So I thought in the 40s and 50s that mainly like two people in a couple slept in different beds because you couldn't show people in the same bed on television in the 40s and the 50s because of censorship. Now, maybe some people did, but not everybody did. But it was in every single episode, in every single show. So when I grew up watching like those Nick at Night things or whatever, I thought that's just what happened. And it's just kind of a representation that I didn't realize. I'm learning the culture through these shows. I don't realize that I'm only learning one thing of the culture. Cut to, us growing up and, in our growing up, people who are like LGBT being represented on film or on shows, like the same kind of thing. Or race, what am I seeing? Or religion. I mean, how many times have you ever seen us of course I'm going to be, because my religion is very underrepresented in the world. It's the fact that many people, just not even immediate media, have no idea what I believe, or there's a lot of assumptions about what I believe that are not true. And so whenever I see it, ever, anybody who purports that they're this religion, or perhaps if I see it on show or something and it's just manhandled, and I'm like, no, that's got nothing to do with me. Yep. Or maybe it's just one thing that's augmented, and then I'm like, okay, so now everybody thinks that crazy thing is what all of us believe, or all of us are. So that's just my little experience. But, not growing, so I grew up with this religion that's a minority, but my skin is a majority. And so I never really thought much about my skin color or being represented in media. So it's interesting to hear like your stories. And you said that you grew up thinking it your whole life, but in the last couple of years, it's even more so.
Yeah. And there's exact what you said where like just ties in so perfectly. I love the examples and connections that you use too, because it's not just our physical attributes or just our, cultures that we think of as race. Like it's other things too, like your religion, like, or your personality type, or, all these different things, like or your sexuality, like those things. So I love the places that we can connect, like, cause I also can relate to you in that, cause I, grew up in the same religion. But the question you asked ties in a lot to what I mentioned about having this body dysmorphia. So not only was I growing up with the media that we were talking about, but also in a time where we were saying women were so overly sexualized.
Yeah.
And that was the like anorexia, like supermodel time, like America's Top Model, like everyone is just starving themselves to death. Yeah. Like, and those are the people. So I'm seeing these tall, just skinny white girls all the time. And they're, they're blonde, they're blue or green or brown, all these things in their features. And then on top of that, my family that I'm around, we don't have my mom is the only family, right? From
so your representation in your
that
family
side
is even
very
low.
So every holiday, every family get together, we're the only people who look different. And we have a very different part of our culture in our home that they don't have. So there was always this, where do I don't quite fit type of thing.
Is there anybody who looks like me?
Yeah. And this comparison all the time. So I have, and this is like, I totally like take accountability for this, but as a child, like I always compared myself to my cousin who was 6 months older than me. And she is like, she's so athletic. She's so fit. She's gorgeous, like blonde hair, like all the things, right? That we're all jealous of. Yeah, we all and are. All my aunts, like my grandma, they're all these cheerleaders, skinny, beautiful, like know how to put themselves together. And then they have this different culture. And because we're so close in age and we're the firstborn cousins together, we were always compared to each other. We're in the same outfits. We're picking the same, every birthday, we're everything together, every Christmas. Oh, we're matching outfits. And then I would hear things, right? Like, so, and
skin tone and colors do not match sometimes.
Yes. And I also like, so my cousin's mother, she's also very she's very like, she has those skills of she knows how to look good. Like that was like a skill set I would say they have. Like they know how to do the makeup, they know how to do the hair, they know how to dress really flattering. And that was like, and for me, I felt like it was a struggle, but I realize now as an adult, it's because like the clothes and the styles that were out there are not designed for my body or my, like you said, my skin tone, my color, my height. And thankfully, like the styles have changed to where they're a little more like inclusive, but there's that family aspect, the media aspect, and then at school. And I also, because the way that my parents are in my half and half, like I am also a curvy Asian Caucasian girl. So that was already something that wasn't valued back then. Like just being curvy itself. And now I don't have the cheekbones. I don't have the nose. I don't have the eyes. My eyes are small. Like things like that. My face is round. So I just really struggled and I hyper focused on my weight. Like that was the thing for me. I thought if I'm skinny, then I'll be as pretty as everyone else because the pretty Asian girls are also bone thin.
Right.
Like, and it took me until I was 18 or 19 and I was working in a salon actually. And I was speaking with my friend who she's about 8 to 10 years older than me. And she's Latina.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking with her about these things, and I really, really struggled. My self-esteem was so low at that time. And as I was expressing these things to her, and she's also like a blunt person who I trust, so it was like not over the line at all, you know, from random person, I'd be like, okay. But she just told me, she was like, you're never gonna be a white girl. And then it just like all clicked. Like something so simple. She was like, it finally made sense. She was like, that's not possible. Like it is impossible. Like the things that you're putting on yourself or comparing yourself to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not physically possible. Like, and it just like blew my mind. Like, and I think it's because.
Did you feel relief because of that? Or?
Oh yeah. Like it took a while to sink in, but like every now and then it's still a good reminder to myself, because it was like, that was a turning point. And thankfully the world was starting to change around that time, because we're talking like 2013, 2014 now, where body positivity movement is beginning. Right. And then we go a couple years later, right, we've got Crazy Rich Asians, and people are starting to draw attention to that thing that we're talking about. Like
we don't see anybody anywhere. Yes.
All that representation and like, we were talking about media growing up, but really our media was pretty limited growing up. Yeah. Like we had like TV. And that was it. I mean, YouTube was invented when I was in 6th grade. Yeah, like, exactly. You know,
when we were growing up, there was definitely a dearth, and then all of a sudden it exploded. So
yeah,
there was just, I don't know, not very much content out there when we were younger. Yeah, I'm gesturing to Alyssa.
Yeah, but not Jeannie.
You have a different life, you know, you have a different experience because you're a little bit younger, and you have so much content out there. Do you find the same thing? Like, do you still feel it even though there's more representation?
Yes and no. I definitely feel unrepresented in, like, sometimes, and then I'll watch something I feel overrepresented.
How so?
It's almost like overstimulating my eyes or something. And so it's just kind of weird for me to see that, because I watched the same shows that she watched growing up, because Mom was like, oh, you can't watch that yet, you're not old enough.
Okay.
But definitely less restricted than Alyssa, but still watching the things with, the Asians, the nerdy kid that does all like math and science and like is into these things. And I was even watching a show the other day that the Asian girl in the show is very, like, she had to hide everything from her mom, because her mom was like very strict Asian. You have to be this way. You can't do this. You can't do that.
Gilmore Girls?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Is that what it is?
Yes. And so that was insane. Okay.
I just read my mind.
Sorry, I just remembered Lane, and I was I wonder if you watched Gilmore Girls. Is that a stereotype?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think, can I tie into the overrepresented thing? I think the struggle for us is there's a few things that tie into that, because because we're a bicultural family.
Yeah.
And my mom has the mindset of more like assimilating into American culture than like our home has to be a Japanese home, and like all the traditions are here. And so I think with the overrepresenting idea, I was thinking about it on the way here, trying to think of a single place where I've seen something as close as a mom from Japan specifically and a dad that's American. Like, I can't think of a single media representation that's that.
You can think of one that's Korean.
Yeah, there's Korean, there's Chinese, and it's okay. I mean, like, one day, you know, it'll happen. Yeah. But that's the thing where we're either seeing people who are more similar to us, but it's still not the same culture. So we can relate to some aspects and not others. Or these people who are fully, like, they might be living in America, but, you know, both of their parents are from the Asian country.
Yeah.
And so they're having that more immersed experience. And so I think that's something for us, that's a gap where, like, we can relate to pieces of it and but it's still not us. Like,
yeah.
If that is kind of what you were touching on.
Mm-hmm.
And even if, and I actually have like a story that relates to this, but I cut you off. Did you want to say more things on that?
I don't remember where I was.
Sorry. I was just like, yes. I get overexcited. But even if we were watching shows or something that is fully Japanese, it's still not a full connection for us.
It's not
because
your story.
Yeah.
Completely.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I love those words, your story, because we didn't grow up there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so a story I have that is just a very like physical manifestation of that. So like we've both been talking about this whole time, like we've grown up in a lot of ways like very American, but there's this piece that just is there a little, but like not enough, this whole
Mm-hmm.
other half of us. So we talk about all these different ways that we didn't quite fit in here, but we're still very American. You know, it's like we don't quite speak our Japanese language, like those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things. When I graduated high school, we went to Japan as a family for the first time for 3 weeks.
Ooh.
We stayed in the house my mom grew up with my grandparents.
Oh, wow.
And I walked into the house and like I literally was just struggling to not just absolutely fall apart in tears, because it was this like complete, like the other half of me that had been gone like my whole life, especially in being the firstborn child when my mom was speaking Japanese. My grandparents were there every summer.
Yeah.
And then I just spent a decade with none of that. Like it was absolutely gone. And here I am just hyper focused on my weight. I can't look like my cousin. I can't look like my friends.
Yeah.
And then I come over with my grandparents and they have 2 bookshelves of our VHS tapes on their wall, and their wall is covered in our pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And like I miss them so much, and now I'm there with them and I can't talk to them. Like I used to be able to talk to them and I can't. And as we're going around Japan, now I'm like, everybody looks like me but not. But on the other side, because they're not as, I was a little curvy and a little overweight. I just had I had some stomach problems and things. So I wasn't in the best health. So all the clothes there are too tight. Mm-hmm. They don't quite fit right. So I'm having...
And you don't speak Japanese.
I don't speak Japanese. Everyone's looking at me and talking to me like I can, and I can't. Mm-hmm. And so I'm having like these parallel problems in the other half, but I'm also getting this other half of me so fulfilled that I didn't have. And so I had this, we were like walking on the street and I turned to my brother because he is probably the closest in relating to me in that experience. Because like I said, you know, me and Jeannie have 9 years apart and he was 2 years apart from me. And so he didn't quite ever become fluent in the language, but he definitely spent about the same amount of time with me as me with our grandparents.
With that, okay.
At the similar age, because once we got a little bit older, like Jeannie was like quite young. Like it was probably hard for her to remember what she can like tell you about. But I turned to him and I was like, I just realized that we can never fully feel like we fit and or belong somewhere. Like we'll always be 1 foot in one country and 1 foot in another country. Mm-hmm. Like I can't ever stand with 2 feet in one place. Mm-hmm. Like, and that was just such an eye-opening moment. And like, I really needed those experiences to help me heal and to like fill in this identity. Like it just really ties into the whole thing of your podcast where I'd become so hyper-focused on being not American enough that I had completely shoved down and left behind the other. And it's not even
half.
fair. And like part of me feels like it's not even fair to say half, because it's just who I am. Like,
oh, interesting.
Yeah. And because I think of it the same way too, where it's like natural to think of it as 50-50, but like something doesn't quite feel right because it's all of who I am. Like all of it together, you know?
I can almost grasp that. I don't want to say that I can grasp it all the way because I don't feel like I have the experience to have sufficient empathy for it. But I think I understand, like, you know, I joke about this podcast, right? Because I'm exploring 1/32 of myself, but I'm really exploring 30 seconds of myself. Like the whole person who I am is really not really divided into those fractions, and it's experiences and it's stories and interactions that I have with my family and things that we go through. And then of course it's like genetics and it's bloodlines, and maybe it's culture that I've inherited, and then maybe it's culture that I see that I could have inherited but I hadn't. But I am Aubrey, and that's who I am.
Yeah.
I can kind of understand or see what you're saying in that respect. But unlike you, I think I haven't experienced something holding me back from the other things, you know? Like no one is, I don't really care enough about being Cherokee that someone is like, you can't be Cherokee, you know? I mean, I do, but I don't, it's not in the same way, because I don't have a grandmother who's actually speaking Cherokee to me. I don't have someone who I can't talk to because that's their only language. And so I think in the respect that you're talking about, I think you might feel it much more acutely than I, that this is you, and this is your being, this is your person, your sense of self. And I can see how, one, it would be really hard to be cut off wherever you are, whatever location you're in on this earth, cut off from another part of yourself, because you feel like this is me being whole, and you're connected to all these other things, but it's hard for them to be in the same location, the same place.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was coherent there, but
no, I think you described it perfectly.
Okay.
I agree. Like, and I think, thankfully there's so many resources out there now to help everybody with this, but just our being our authentic selves, and our self-acceptance and our self-esteem and our positivity and our vulnerability, and having the strength to be those things, whoever we are and whatever that is for us, regardless of if the world is going to understand, because we all have, doesn't matter where you're from or who you are, like we all have pieces of us that are like that. And so definitely like a lot of healing and just realizations and learning, like I mentioned earlier, like it just naturally, the Japanese went away, and then a decade later, I'm like, wait, why don't I speak that anymore?
Where did that go?
Yeah. Like, what?
Where did I put that? I did put it somewhere. Like, is it in this box here? Like,
yeah, like what actually happened? Because it's just our day-to-day life experience. And then 10, 15 years later, you're like trying to wrap your mind around.
Since the Japanese trip, it was just something that I've now kind of normalized. Is the more Asian side in me. Because I've also felt that I don't belong in either country. And it's very difficult to feel that way all the time. And just knowing that I'll never be fully one. But embracing that I am both. And that is my one.
Yeah, that's who you are. That's the complete you.
Yeah. Like full circling, but
I think I have like one more thing to add, and then if she's good, we can
I might talk a little bit more because you talked a lot. Sorry. But I mean, she did just invite you.
We can do multiple episodes with her if we get invited back.
Oh my god. Yes, seriously, yes.
She's probably gonna have to do a part 1 and part 2
I'm
already.
gonna love it, actually. Like, yeah, it's very insightful, right? Because so I found a tagline the other day that this is kind of summing up my podcast, but it's exploring the unexpected in who we are. And a lot of times I cannot expect your story. And so I love that I'm being taught what your guys' story was like, you know, because I can make assumptions, but it's not going to necessarily be correct of what your assumptions or what my assumptions were. And so, yeah, I really appreciate hearing your guys' stuff, especially like you're answering questions that I had along the way, you know, because you had told me the story, Alyssa, about trying to find someone in history that you could dress up as when you're doing the
wax museum
assignment. And for me, because I'm white, I have the luxury of not worrying or even having it occur to me that I would have to find someone who was white to dress up. Honestly, like I have that luxury, and I openly acknowledge that. So you having that, I just had that question. You know,
I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but you know, it goes the Western history of white people, and then it's Black people, and then everybody else is just kind of like
there's not much.
So you were kind of there, kind of not. Whatever, bye. Like, if you want to learn about that, go. Intentionally study somewhere else. And so there is a real logistical challenge about being able to represent and learn about our history, because when we mix cultures, what are we going to choose to learn about and select? How are we going to make it fit in our time and be meaningful and impactful to everybody?
How do you cherry pick to make the most impact to the widest audience?
Yes.
That is probably honestly the worst moral job.
So hard. And I think the thing that I think is a simple solution that would positively impact everybody is if for minority cultures we shared more positive stories. Like, we have to acknowledge, and we can't just brush to the side the internment camps or the Holocaust. Obviously, like, we need to talk about those things so they don't happen again and learn from them. But also, like, in a way that perpetuates discrimination, because here we are sitting around and the only thing representing something even close to the other part of me is an internment camp.
Yeah.
Like, where's the story of somebody who immigrated and brought their family and was successful? And that's the stuff that's starting to come out in media now and books. And there are some wonderful books. There's one called American Like Me, who is exactly this thing that I'm talking about. Like, that was like so enlightening and healing to read about these people from all these different Asian cultures, because again, they're not all the same. These different Asian cultures of these different ages and different time frames in America, these different generations. Are they first generation, second generation? How connected are they to their both cultures, or their one culture or the other? So it was beautiful, like, and so it just beautiful to read those stories and to both connect and to learn.
American Like Me?
Yeah.
I'll look that up.
Yeah, and I think America Ferrera is the one who compiled, like, she's the one that had the idea and compiled the story. So her story is in there, but it's a compilation of a lot of people's stories. But Jeannie has been itching to say.
Jeannie, talk to me.
Okay, so kind of going back to like the wax museum and 5th grade and stuff.
What did you do for that?
So I was Pocahontas.
Nice. Okay.
Mostly because the other, like, I look more Hispanic and like native-ish.
So you're saying
compared
that
to the other, like,
to
people.
The uninformed people like myself, I could just look at you and you could pass for a lot of different minorities.
Oh yeah, that's a very interesting point.
Yes, it is a very interesting point.
Yeah, and that was something I asked my teacher. I was like, "Oh, who should I be?" And she said, "Well, you look most like," and then gave me names like Sacagawea and Pocahontas and all of
Mulan,
these. Yeah, like, she was like, all these people you look like. And I was like, well, what if I want to be Amelia Earhart?
Yeah.
But I couldn't be that.
She wouldn't let you?
Well, it was already taken.
Oh.
But
I do wonder, like, if somebody wanted to, I'm wondering if they would let you.
They would have let me.
Okay.
Yes, but it was just, she was like, well, you look more like these people. And that was something kind of off-putting, and I always... from then was just kind of like, well, am I always going to be in that category for people? And like, I am, and I've accepted it, and I don't hate it, but it's not it doesn't. Well, it depends on who's saying it and how, like, their intentions and their voice in the way they say it.
Yeah.
Because they'll be like, oh, you're like Asian, or they're like, you're Asian.
Oh.
It just makes you feel very
judged.
Yeah, judged.
Sorry,
and
put words in your mouth.
It's okay. I was scrambling, but it's like judged and unaccepted. But being Pocahontas, I've learned so much about her and like her tribe. And from 5th grade to now, I've been her in like wax museums or Disney performances.
Oh, neat.
Like 10 or 15 times. And it's just...
Are you using the same costume?
No. Oh, no.
I'm just wondering, like, who's sewing these costumes for you?
So, the first costume I actually made with my mother.
She's talented. And my mom and grandma are also good at sewing.
Yeah.
She's good at
So, we glued and sewed a bunch of, like, cute little beads on this cute kind of, like, burlap-y fabric and made it pretty accurate to the photos that I had looked up.
Yeah.
And... like, learning about what actually happened in real life.
Did you do a studying of when she went to England?
I did.
Isn't it interesting how she's a fish out of water in that respect?
Yeah.
She's the only person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was so crazy to me that she was a lot like our mom and left her family.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah,
it's
and
so brave. It's so brave when people do that. I really want to
even today.
Yeah.
And then freshman year, I played Pocahontas in this Disney royalty, is what we called it. It was a royal banquet. And so I bought a costume off Amazon and straightened my hair all nice and like just like super natural makeup to make me kind of look like her. But again, I'm a lot shorter and stuff, but they're tiny kids, so they didn't really care. And it was really funny to me just how every kid just, oh my gosh, it's Pocahontas. And it just made me feel so really like so happy, but also it's like, this isn't her real, like this isn't her story.
So when you say this isn't her story, were you like feeling like sorry for Pocahontas that like what do you mean
it's like
exactly?
She wasn't being represented in a way that she should have been. It wasn't respecting her in a way that I believe she should have been respected.
Because of why?
Because they romanticized this thing that didn't happen. They changed the story so much.
Okay, because it was Disney.
And
the event, just to give context, the event is where it's specifically Disney, the royalty banquet. So everybody in the choir or whatever organization is throwing it, it's usually the choir. Okay. Everyone who is either helping with it or they're in the chorus singing Disney songs or they are a character. So they audition for a character, specifically Disney. It's focused mostly on princes, princesses, or like, Moana has Maui. So, that kind of thing. Yeah. It is a Disney focused event.
Yeah. Okay. So then you're kind of like, I love Pocahontas so much and kind of grumbly about the Disney portrayal of Pocahontas.
Learning, just researching about her from 5th grade to freshman year was so insightful. Just being in that and having to like portray the Disney version of her, it was fun, but it wasn't accurate.
That's a lot like when we were little, the whole Thanksgiving thing. Like, we just grew up believing the whole, they sat at the table and ate together. And I'm in my sophomore AP U.S. history class, and my teacher, for the first time in 16 years of my life, so that's not true. Actually, they were brutally, there was genocide. So, that kind of thing. And of course, maybe there were some communities that were, like that with each other. But after that, it's hard because I like the message, right? Where it's like, we should all eat together and accept each other.
It's my favorite holiday for that reason. The message and how inclusive it is.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that. And I think we should still keep that message where we can. But I also, now that I learned more about history, like you said, like I'm a teacher now. Like I teach elementary kids. I have books in my classroom of the Pilgrims and the Indians and Happy Thanksgiving. And I'm like chucking those, I'm like, no, like we can teach that message without just completely disregarding and disrespecting the history of the Native American people and then glorifying and making the colonizers seem like they were these accepting,
friendly white people.
When that's not really what happened. And of course, like I said, there are probably communities and stories where like that was the case, and that's wonderful. But we need to, I just don't feel like that's accurate. Okay. Yeah, just be accurate and be like, this was wrong.
And the pendulum can swing both ways. Like the first Thanksgiving, the story isn't straight genocide either, even though I joke about it. But it wasn't straight like unicorns and turkeys or whatever. Like it wasn't either of those two things. And there's more politics involved and more I don't know. I think that if there is some way that we can accurately represent this situation that kind of did happen, but in a way that these two cultures were very suspicious of each other and didn't like each other and treated each other badly. And how can we tell people that? How can we like tell our kids that with it?
Making it developmentally friendly for where they are at, so they can understand the degree of accuracy that's appropriate for their age level, but also learning the lesson that's supposed to come out of it.
Having me do the work, like it takes work for me to actually figure out, even now just talking to you, like I'm like, okay, you know, what are the different Thanksgiving stories I've heard? And I'm trying to like think of the references and just to get it right as I'm talking to you, you know, so it means that there's work that I should do that I just can't rely on, you know, one thing or another. I can't say one spectrum or end of the spectrum or another in the Thanksgiving story or any story that we're talking about, because I really should be doing the work and trying to like see the different sides of it and doing the actual research. And I think that's one of the things that is problematic, you know, with history and representation, is that it's either one end of the spectrum or another, and the pendulum swings, but it never like hits the middle part of it.
Stay in.
Or maybe there's context, there's more context to understand. And I think it's just a lack of resources, but it's also just a lack of wanting to look at the resources, which is my way of saying that I'm lazy.
I think that comes from, though, the fact that like history is so much more, it's so complicated and deep, and I don't know, it's just interesting to me with the Pocahontas thing and and the things I've learned in history, like how our history can be rewritten to use to manipulate people.
That's true.
Whether it's for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Like the Thanksgiving story could be a form of that if we want to view it that way, you know.
Very much so.
Or Pocahontas' story, because the movie does tell a good lesson, right? I say in quotes to the listeners, you know. But are we disrespecting her? That's what people think of her now, and was that really what she went through, or what she lived and died for? Like that was somebody's life.
Yeah,
like,
what was her focus, and what was her, you know, why, if she were, could we say what she was like really concerned about? Yeah. What is it that she was fighting for, you know, in her life? What was her project?
And if we want to get the accurate details, that's a journey in itself, just for one topic. Oh,
yeah.
like the Thanksgiving story. I mean, if we were going to look at it really academically, like you'd have to look at a variety of like very, places, you know, proven resources and also take into account how those resources were made, where they came from. So, you know, the fallacies that could be happening within each resource. Like, I mean, if we were going to really, like, it is a wormhole, like, and like you said, something we need maybe to focus more on in some areas. But I think that's why people have an aversion to it. Same thing with politics, right? Like, where's the true story? Well, where is it? It happened, you know, even something that happens in present day, if you're not there eyewitnessing it, like, you know.
It just kind of goes back to our thing when we were talking about cherry picking and what a moral imperative it is, because you are forced to cherry pick. There's just not enough time in someone's day to learn every single thing that needs to be learned in order to have true context. So what a moral thing it is to have to cherry pick and really decide, like, what is the information you're putting in front of the next generation or whatever you're teaching.
And teaching them the skills, because I think just truly acknowledging that you cannot include everything and that everyone is going to have something unique to them that they'll want to dive in deeper to. And so being very intentional with that, like talk about it and teach your kids how to do that for themselves, right? Like when you go to college or on your own time, or like giving them the skills so that they can individually, you know, fill in those gaps for themselves where they want to, where our public education system is just not going to be able to.
Yeah.
Jeannie, do you have more on your mind?
A little bit more.
Tell me.
Kind of going back to like the whole banquet stuff. The next year, sophomore year, we had a new choir teacher, and she was really, really on me about being Mulan.
Okay.
And because I look like her, and she was very like, oh, you should do it. You sound like her. You look like her. The kids would be super into it. And I was like, I don't know. Oh, it'd be a perfect fit because you look just like her. And it was, again, that physical profiling. Like, I really wanted to be like Esmeralda or Moana, because their stories just resonate with me. It was just kind of like, I don't really want to be this racially profiled the way I look, the physicality. But she was super, what's the word? Just
insistent?
Yeah.
Okay.
About it. And I finally gave in and auditioned as Mulan. And
was there a reason why you didn't want to be profiled as Mulan? Like, was there something about it? They're just like, why? Because she's the only Asian? Or
yeah, it definitely was a lot like that. It kind of felt like they were putting me in a box. Like, like the whole checking your race thing. I didn't want to be profiled as just this one thing, or it's not even the right.
Yeah, she's Chinese. Yeah, it's not even like you're Chinese. Right. Yeah,
someone was just looking at her and thinking Asian.
Yeah, and like I had my hair shorter, and like I did look a lot like her. Like it was pretty physically accurate,
but still the box.
Yeah, but I was like the box. I didn't want that to be what people saw me as, and I didn't want to give in to that and be what they saw me as. And so that was something that really got on my nerves and has been something in my life, even just as like 17 years that I've been on the earth. It's something that I've found is brought up a lot with my friends and just random people talking to me, having a conversation like, oh, like, what should I get? Like at the stores, you see something and you're, what do you recommend kind of thing? And I'm like, well, this, but like you have this skin type or whatever. And I'm like, okay.
Oh yeah, it's like 100% daily life. Like,
yeah.
And it is for everybody.
Yeah.
It's unique in the way that it affects you. Like,
yeah. And then I just took the SATs a couple months ago. I also went to the dentist a little while ago with you should check the boxes for your race.
Really, they had the demographic survey there. Okay.
Yeah, so they had that, and I'm happy about it because they actually like evolved a lot, and they had white Asian, like white American Asian, and they had like American Hispanic, and I was like, wow, like we've come a long way in just the 9 years between me and Alyssa. Like that's insane, and I want it to keep progressing, but it's also like I've never really had the problem of having to check just white or just Asian, you know,
like being regulated to only being able to check white.
Yeah.
I love the check all that apply.
Yeah.
Like, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just put a circle through all of the early.
Yeah. And then I feel bad for the people who aren't even on there and they're other, you know. I'm like, ugh.
It's crazy just how much my friends have evolved since 6th grade. That
like in how they deal with you?
In how they speak to me, because like at first, you know, you're just getting to know each other, and pretty much all they see is that I'm Asian. And not even knowing what type of Asian. They're just like, oh, like, where are you from? I'm like, well, I'm from America, but my heritage is Japanese.
Classic question.
Yeah, it is.
And like,
and I've asked it, and honestly, like, my motive is, I want to just, I guess I want to defend myself, but my motive is innocent, but I understand what I'm really saying is, you look different than what I expect. And now I'm just curious about what I'm seeing that is not meeting my expectations. And nobody wants to be on the receiving end of you look different than what I expect. And I can understand that cognitively, that it's kind of a bummer to receive. So
I have the same we have the same struggle. Like I had a coworker, and this will be quick because I want you to be able to talk.
It's okay.
But like when I have a coworker, I can tell it's kind of looks different, like you said. And then I'm like I'm trying to think of a polite way, especially as a person who's been on the receiving end of those questions all the time. So I think what we'll need to do, you know, as a society is just normalize a phrase that's considerate and coming from a place of openness, like, you know, instead of like, what are you? Because that kind of dehumanizes you a little bit when you say, what are you, like an object, you know? So it's like, or we're all misusing, not quite knowing if we're using the terms ethnicity or culture or heritage, you know, or race. Like, are we asking the question we're actually trying to ask with the words we're using? So if we normalized a phrase, you know, that
would be nice.
It would be.
Let me know when you get on that.
Yeah. That's great. It's something I keep in mind because sometimes I run into people who ask in a
somebody will find it. Yeah. And I would love to know if you figure it out.
Yeah. Most people are like, I don't mean to be rude. I just really want to know. And I'm trying to like,
so curious.
like, you know, and they're like, hey, is it okay to ask? You know, and that's where I can tell like that person's heart is in the right place.
Yeah.
You know, they're not trying to racially profile me. They just want to know who I am. And like, that's okay. Like, it's okay to want to know who I am. Yeah. And I do want to share that part of me. Always it's an awkward conversation at first because we're trying to be okay with each other.
Yeah.
Anyways, just to touch
but
on
like
that.
Also being in high school now, you can see I can see the other Asians as like, there actually is like this competition aspect of it for sure. And it's been
what do you mean
for you as well.
Like you have to compare yourself
it's
to
like
those Asians, or?
it's like you're the Asian friend in the group.
Yeah.
If there's multiple,
it's like a territory.
You stare each other down.
Like
it's like no, like get out of my group.
Really?
It's very much like that.
Interesting. How did that happen?
Can I touch on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the interesting thing is there's a lot of challenges from being different. But there are some selfish benefits that come from being the special different person.
Yes.
And it's hard, like, and especially because you go through these struggles based on how you look so often, I think sometimes we can become our self-esteem or our belonging can become dependent on the attention, or even whether it's a healthy thing or not, like we can become like this ownership of the special different things that we do get because we look different. And I say special as a very like loose, broad term, as a more like unique, because it's not always a special thing. Like I shouldn't be like the one over sexualized Asian woman in my group, but when someone else comes in, I'm like, no, you can't take that from me. Like, like you don't get to take that from me.
It's my thing.
Yeah.
So it's messed up. It's all messed up.
Humans are weird.
Yes.
Humans are weird, man.
So it's interesting because I find that as from my own perspective as a bicultural Asian Caucasian person in Idaho, right? I find that in my life experience, it's easy for an Asian man and an Asian woman as a teenager to be friends. Like that's almost like, oh, you're like me. And then we become friends easily. But and I can't speak for the boys, but when it's a girl, it's like,
it's
okay,
like,
who's gonna be the dominant Asian here? Yeah, it's like instantly, and it like doesn't matter. I had experience with Korean people, with Japanese people, with Chinese people, like instantly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter like where you're from culturally. If you look kind of like me, you steal my friends from me. That's the feeling.
This battle of like who's more Asian. Like there's this thing, like it's a strange thing.
Is this like ever a verbal thing you're actually saying out loud?
No,
all in your mind?
No. It's definitely
it is a silent.
It's completely silent in your head.
Yeah, but it's an energy thing. Yes,
but you're like throwing off energy.
Yeah,
it's instant
but you
too.
both know for sure. Everyone knows it's happening, and
it's weird to be, let's say, 17. And for the first time, you have somebody to compare yourself to that actually looks like you.
Yeah.
That's not a white person or a Hispanic person.
Okay, yeah.
It's like, other people, we already at a young age, I'd been dealing about like, oh, I'm not white, I'm not Hispanic. But there was never like, where, like that coming in, like, or if there was somebody, maybe you're not close with them, like it's a strange thing. Like, and I think it's really vulnerable, actually. I think that's why we get so guarded.
Yeah.
Because it's something so new and different where it's like, oh, this could really hurt me. Because before I always had, in my mind, this is me speaking from myself, I had the excuse of like, oh, well, I don't have the same body type as them. Like my DNA is different. Like, all this kind of thing. But then here comes this woman who's flipping gorgeous. Yeah. Everybody loves her, and I'm like, I don't have any more excuses. They just like her better than me. It's like, what's gonna happen? And
I was just thinking
specific ways.
I was just thinking that there's probably nothing more scary to a normal human, than having the better version of yourself show up.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it was like,
because all of a sudden you're like obsolete.
It's interesting because I've realized now as an adult, like, because teenager is so hard.
Yeah.
But, like, as an adult, and I've learned more, I'm like, okay, this is actually, like, harming us more than helping us. And so I've tried to change my own mind because I still feel it instantly. I'm like, oh, another Asian person. I didn't expect that. Like, whoa, like, how's this? Okay, you're really pretty. Like, what am I going to do?
Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and so there's always the eye lock, the first eye lock. Like, it doesn't matter how big the room is, how small the room is, how many people are there. There's the first eye lock when you're like, oh my gosh, there's another Asian girl. And then after that, you kind of feel it out. But I've intentionally, as an adult, been like, okay, like, we would all feel so much happier if we, like, this is actually, if we think about it, a thing that we've wanted, like, really, like, this sense of belonging in somebody like me, and yet we are so, like, aggressively pushing it away. And so I'm trying as an adult to fight that natural like insecurity. I think it really comes from an insecurity.
Yeah.
And I tried to, and the thing is too, they're probably going to be standoffish to you at least. So it's hard to be the person.
Because they're going to feel that too.
Yes. It's hard to be the person that's like, hi, and like be nice. Yeah. And like, it's like talking to the mean popular girl at school. It's like, exactly, like that's the thing you can relate it to. It's like exactly like that.
Mm-hmm.
And and so that's something like, regardless of like how they're treating me back, I'm trying to maintain. And I think something that's off-putting is that when we put our walls down, we're expecting a certain type of connection with that person and then realizing it's not there.
Yeah.
Because you're Asian, so you're like automatically, hey, we're the same, but then you're two different individual people.
Yes. Yeah. And then you're so different. And there's a few pieces where you're like, oh yeah, finally someone who gets that. But it's not enough.
Right? Yeah.
It's not enough to build a connection with them. So that's really interesting.
One 30-second Cherokee with Aubrey Jean, and with all the favors I can cash in. Produced by me, Aubrey. Executive produced by nobody, because I don't know what that means. The Anchor app by Spotify holds my hand for all the engineering. The music is also found on Anchor. You can rate and review this show on many podcast platforms someday, and you might find your review featured on a future episode. Or I might burn it in effigy. Got comments? Send me a message at anchor.fm/Aubrey-Jean. That's anchor.fm/Aubrey-Jean.